a controversial thing that I think would help a lot of people is understanding that design is a business career, um, and
Mm.
that businesses want to be profitable, and if that your salary costs more than the profit or revenue that you bring in for your company, then you get laid off.
Yo, yo, yo. What up?
No, no.
How's it going?
It's going. Thank you for joining us, Tregg.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. All from a
And
tweet.
all from a tweet, but from a very special person, friend of the pod, Jed Bridges. And he recommended you for the podcast to come on and for us to talk. So kind of means you're a big deal.
I honestly, I don't think I've ever actually talked one on one with my voice to Jed. Only through Twitter.
Really?
Yeah.
That tends to be the thing in that space, to be honest.
Yep.
More
Yep.
anons, right? Cool. So welcome to the pod. We have a lot of questions for you. I did a little bit of Twitter stalking about an hour before the pod to refresh my brain on a lot of your takes. A lot of them I've seen throughout the week, and we'll get into some of that. We'll start off by actually diving into your role. Actually, before that, how did you get into design, and how did you land at where you are now? And then we'll talk about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, cool. My journey into design started in like 2005. For me, that was fifth grade, which like for a long time I felt like I was really young when I would say that, but now I feel like I'm old when I say it. Like there's some time in the past 3 to 4 years that transition. But yeah,
Sure.
so like in fifth grade, I I we had a computer in my sister's room that was the family computer. And I became obsessed with making things on the internet. Like my gateway was DeviantArt, and then I was on like games like Neopets, just like making junk, just like profile picture stuff. Designing my user lookup, downloading Macromedia Flash illegally on the on the family computer. Yeah, so that was like my first foray into design. And I remember I would pick up the Computer Arts magazine at Barnes and Noble when I'd go with my dad, and I'd like read about being a freelance web designer, and I was like, "This sounds cool." Uh, and funny because like
Did
I
wait
actually,
did they call it web design? Or was it called like a webmaster? What do they
yeah,
call that?
okay, so it was freelance web design at the time, specifically web design, and it was the all the magazines at the time were talking about Web 2.0. Everyone's like, "Whoa, these things are glossy and crazy." Um, yeah, it's funny because like now I don't like doing freelance web work at all. But 2005, we thought that was the thing. Um, and then in high school, I picked up guitar, and I thought that was the thing. I was like, music is rad. I still love music, but I was like, this is my focus. This is my calling. Started a band similar to Jed. Maybe that's why he recommended me. Started a band. That was my super like focus. I was actually going to school for music. I was going for recording arts, and by necessity, I started designing our album covers, our T-shirts, our social media presence, like learning about marketing. Grew it to 1,000 likes on Facebook, which was like a grind to get 1,000 people to care about my stupid metalcore band. Uh, and yeah, so like just like started designing stuff for a band. Was going to school for recording arts, and I was in this Facebook group of people also going for recording arts, and I saw all these people saying how none of the bands wanted to pay them, no one wanted to record with them, and how they had to have like a full time job on top of what they
Mhm.
wanted to be their job. And I was like, there seems to be a supply and demand problem here, and I'm adding to the supply. So literally, like on a Friday before I was supposed to start class at a 4 year long program for recording arts, I changed my major to design because I was like, hey, I like this design thing. I did it in elementary and middle school, making stuff on the internet, but doing it for my band. Maybe this is the thing, and ended up being like the perfect decision. Fell in love with it, quit the band. Yeah, and it's kind of been history ever since. I had a interactive class, interactive media, so it was like UX, that like blew my mind and changed my perspective on the world. When I learned that like UX is measurable, I was like, this is it. So ever since, it's been my focus. Worked at JP Chase. Been at some startups since that. Yeah, here I am.
I think that Pascal and I probably would like to dive more into specifically what you meant by UX being measurable. What is
Yeah.
interesting about that? Because that sounds to a lot of people probably really boring that you put
Hmm.
numbers, KPIs, whatever behind improving user experience. But can you talk about that?
Yeah. The specific thing that blew my mind was Fitt's law, which is the size of an object determines how fast it is. It takes for your cursor to get to that object, which is you never use that in your day to day, and it's an obvious thing. But the fact that it was like measured in a way, and there was research around it, it blew
Hmm.
my mind. And so there's something about the combination of creativity and business and psychology that really struck a chord with me. And yeah, being able to measure the impact of what you do is really cool. Because I spent so long in like more creative endeavors, like not really knowing what actually was driving people to like it or dislike it. Like with music, it's you almost never know, and it doesn't matter. It's more about your taste. But to have something that's one part taste, but also you can prove if it's working or not was really cool.
That is pretty like yeah. There's like I guess different levels to that because you can say that in a sense, like, okay, that might be considered part of user experience, but like
Hmm.
measuring the size and distance of something
Yeah.
is not actually measuring the experience, it's measuring the UI of how somebody interacts with it. And if it
Hmm.
is successful in its micro objective, but not the overall objective yet. But then you can still add more layers to it and say, okay, there's actually more metrics, more things that you can do to study how somebody actually uses something and enjoys it. Is there
Hmm.
is there metrics or maybe not metrics, but like are there ways in which you find that you are more comfortable with in measuring like the emotional appeal of something as opposed to like a quantitative
Interesting.
thing?
That's a great question. um, I think qualitative, specifically discovery research, is some of the most valuable UX research. Usability is obviously important, uh, but you get there pretty quick. It's like six or so rounds of testing, and you learn most of your usability problems. So yeah, discovery and qualitative is so powerful. When I was at JP Chase, I was on a team of researchers and strategists, some of like the best researchers I've ever seen perform research. Like you'd see them ask a question in a certain way, and you're like, I see what you did, and that's really smart. So I learned a lot through that. And yeah, talking about emotions when you're talking money, it's so emotional. It's so tied to that. So there was
Mhm.
a lot of ways when I was there that we would think about that. Um, a big thing is avoiding like shame, and it's hard to measure that quantitatively. So that's something you'd have to talk to an actual user about. um, yeah, it's a really interesting question. In like more recent work that I've done, like I was at Stark working on accessibility.
Are you still there
Accessibility.
or
I left Stark in February, so I
okay,
have a new
cool.
gig. I'm at a company called
Congrats.
Nightfall. Thank you. Um, yeah, so still great friends with all the people at Stark. Still think they're going to win. Just needed some. I went to a technical product, so I'm working on cybersecurity stuff now. I wanted to
Ooh.
flex that part of my brain. Um, so yeah, at Stark we would talk a lot about when we first setting up the Stark for Mac, which was the main thing I was hired to work on. We talked a lot about the perception of yourself and your role as you're working on something that's related to accessibility. Because like there's one part of this that was assumption, and then it was validated when talking to people. But like there's a lot of guilt and shame that can go into that, and also some like fear that like you're gonna take something from me. Like if I'm telling you that, hey, this thing you did isn't accessible, if we said that with the wrong tone, we could turn you off from accessibility as a whole, and then you become like the people on Twitter who are like, accessibility is stupid, UX is stupid, make everything light pink on white. Like there's like this like gut reaction to go the opposite direction. You could also run the risk of like causing the like the ostrich effect, where you stick your head in the sand and you want to avoid anything that makes you uncomfortable. And it's very like possible to make it feel like a moral failing. And that's like the exact opposite of what you want, because like literally we're trying to make you better at your job so that people can use the things that you make. That's like it. That's the goal, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, through doing like qualitative research, literally one-on-one interviews, we got to uncover the different ways that that you could do that, make them feel worse or better. Uh, yeah, and to kind of bake those things into the principles and the product as a whole as a result.
That's awesome. Can you give an example real quick about like a positive way that you can make them feel?
Yeah, so obviously you wouldn't want someone to feel positive about having a bunch of like accessibility errors. So like there's some urgency that needs to happen, right?
Mhm,
Um, but instead, it's like when something has been resolved or they've made strides in a direction, um, rewarding that in some way. Like not
mm,
only are we saying like, "Hey, your stuff is this much more accessible," but also like you did a good job, um, adding that sort of stuff on top. And when we're talking money, at Chase, that was a massive portion of the work that we did. Um, I can't talk about a ton of it because some of it probably might not ever happen, but it's still proprietary. But what did launch from the work I did is autosave in the Chase app, and there's little tips as you go along when you set up the autosave rules that help you figure out um, how much to save, what your goal should be. And we made sure to keep that language really neutral
mhm,
because that's super important. We don't want it to be too positive because like then it feels like you're trying to get something from me, and people are so
mhm.
skeptical of the bank. They're like, "What are you trying to get from me? Why are you trying to? Why are you saying 9 months of savings? Like, what does this mean? Why are you doing that?" And people are super skeptical, and for good reason sometimes. Um, but then, like
Yeah.
when something happens, when they actually do the work, to like give them that benefit, like, hey, you saved this much more over this time, to like give them that like little hit of dopamine, uh, in addition to the actual like better position they are in financially. So yeah, those are a couple examples of ways that we've done that, or I've done that in the past.
That's awesome. I think that Pascal might want to talk about like some of his experiences with accessibility and trying to implement that at a large
Mm,
scale. Because I know that from your experience at Stark and other companies trying to win over other people, I guess at Stark is probably easy. That's the focus. But like
yeah.
other companies, accessibility is not the focus.
Hmm.
And I was recently talking to a founder, and they're like, I don't care about accessibility in this round of design because what we're doing is just trying to build a product to test out and see if it actually works, and then we'll go back through it.
Hmm.
Only have like 10 people we want to actually try to have this be used. If 10 people like using this and they actually will pay for it, then we'll go back and invest in it. So like there's different times in which kind of you can allocate resources to something like that because that is
Yeah.
another thing to worry about. But Pascal, at other companies, you've led efforts in trying to integrate accessibility, and some of them succeeded and some of them failed. Can you talk about those experiences, Pascal?
Yeah, and it's something that's always like to your point. Some companies want to get out and launch a product and then figure out accessibility. From my experience, when they do that, they actually never end up going back to accessibility. They just like it's just an afterthought, and then they plug it in here and there. Like
Hmm.
in my opinion, it has to be done from the start. Whatever you're
Yep.
designing, design it from an accessibility perspective, so that then doesn't have to be an afterthought. Like I've worked on huge enterprise software that was striving for accessibility. Didn't matter which component you were designing, which element, you had to include accessibility in it because it wouldn't be consumed, it wouldn't be adopted. While we had other companies that I worked with, and they wanted to be the best company in the world, or the platform that everybody uses, yet was zero accessible.
Hmm.
And I was trying to explain to them, it's like 1 out of 4 individuals have accessibility issues. So how can you say in your principles or company things that you want to be the company that anybody can use? You're failing right out of your mission because you're not accessible. So you're failing right
Hmm.
away out of the gate. You're failing. And they're designing that even I that have zero accessibility issues, I could not make out a text field, an input field, or anything because the color contrast ratio was so close that depending on the brightness of my screen, I could not see the difference. Yet they wanted to design this way. It was the best design ever. And it just gets into the elements where good design is good design. It's not about making that shiny new button animate and woohoo, it's fantastic. It's about good design, people
Hmm.
using a product, not to get likes on Twitter or anything. It's about making a product that people use, that's accessible, and that's actually going to have an impact in the world. And I think that a lot of people don't have that in set. So when you design it accessibility with that in mind, and then you're not going to have it as an afterthought. It should always be there right away out of the gate. That's my 2 cents from the experiences of working like in so many different industries. That's how I think you should approach anything you design. But yet, too many tables shelf it and then actually never get back to it.
Yeah. Something like 98% of the internet is not accessible to this day. And the cost of retrofitting for accessibility is 100 times more expensive. So if you are at an early stage and you're willing to spend 100 times more dollars to fix the problems that you're building, yeah, go ahead. But also, when people say like, "Oh, well, we're not building this for everyone. We're building this for a specific segment of people," like, yeah, and guess what? Every segment has people in it that have disabilities. Like, there's not like a this group of people are disabled and this group of people are your users. Like, that's just never the case. There's always going to be overlap. And so at Stark, we were giving this master class, and one of the slides in it is it's like designed for everyone, and I cross it out, and it's like designed for the people that you want to design for, but it should be for anyone. Designed for anyone. Anyone should be able to use the thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's for them. There's a difference between those two things. So yeah,
And
the
and one thing
accessibility
that
from the beginning is so important.
and I agree. And I think one thing that a lot of people forget, they always constantly put themselves in, I'm the user. Like, this looks great because I'm the user. You are not this. I don't care if you use a product 100 times a day. You are not the user. At the end of the day, you're not. I mean, yes, you are a user, but you can't design just for yourself.
Yeah, you can be a user, but oftentimes because people think that they're the user, they become selfish in their intent on how they're designing. They don't actually look at the research. They don't actually talk to users. You go, I'm a user. I already know what they're going to think. Maybe you're a subject matter expert, and I agree that you can become very intelligent as to what your users are thinking intuitively. But you should always still go back to the research. You always should still go back and understand what their perspectives are, because oftentimes you're stuck in a bubble and there's something you can't see because you're in the bubble. And I really like what you said, Tregg, about design for anyone, not everyone. It was kind of like this other quote that I recently read. You can have anything, but not everything. Right? If you want to buy a car, go for it. If you want to get a nice house, really hot spouse, you want to have like all these other things in your life, fine. But there's going to be a point where you're going to spread yourself too thin, trying to do all these initiatives, trying to run all these businesses, try whatever. You need to focus on what you really want, because you can have anything you really want, just not everything that you really want. You have to prioritize that. And also that translates back to what you're saying before. Anyone, not everyone. I want to jump real quick. How did you meet Jed? How did you guys cross paths?
Literally Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm like super on Twitter. I think I've found almost every job that I've ever had through Twitter except for one. Yeah.
Really? That's wild.
Yeah. Like Stark was because I became friends with Kat, the CEO, on Twitter. And we met up and had coffee in New York, and a year some change later, I'm working for a company. Yeah, and before that, it was Candid. I became friends with Ethan, who was one of the designers at Candid. Candid's a direct-to-consumer clear liner company, so it's like Smile Direct Club, but the competitor to them. Yeah, so I became friends with him on Twitter. He moved to New York around the same time I did. Met up with him a few times, complained about work, and then started working for Candid. So yeah, a lot of my gigs were through Twitter.
How do you get the gig through Twitter? Like, walk us through that.
Yeah, so actually, I'm like super passionate about mentoring like new designers, young designers, and this is something I tell almost all of them: is like have a presence online, or like find some group. It doesn't have to be Twitter, but I think Twitter's great. Not everyone's voice is meant for Twitter, but like find where designers are that you care about and you like and you want to talk to, and then join the conversation. And yeah, so like literally, it's just through the day-to-day interactions, just like being in people's replies, like replying to Kat, being like, I agree, I like this thing, and then eventually it turns into like a real friendship, and then they post a job listing and I DM them and I'm like, hey, we've been talking for years, how about I join your company.
So what you said was you join a community and be active and participate in that community and listen
Yeah.
to others who have other opinions and kind of help form your opinion. So that's like number one. Number two is you can use it as an opportunity to become friends and get on a personal level and
Yeah.
prove your value over time and build that relationship so that when you get to number three, they post a job, you already have that relationship built and you have the eminence, whatever you call it, that kind of social presence in the community. They're more likely to pick you because you've already established yourself. So I really like those three things. That's
Yeah, yeah,
smart.
exactly. That has been my strategy. That's what I started doing when I was in school. Just like found where designers were and started talking to them. Yeah, I think
And
there's a lot of value there.
and I think mentoring is also a great way for you to grow personally and professionally.
Mm.
Like you get out of it as much as you put in. So a lot of times, like people think, oh, I'm just giving out. No, you're actually going to grow a lot more because you learn from other people. Like you learn, even if you have way more experience, you're going to learn a lot from the conversations you have. You're going to learn a lot about yourself, how you interact with the individuals, and even how you apply things. So I think it's such a great element to your career. And I recommend this for everybody and just putting yourself out there. Like I talked to, like in my one-on-ones with a lot of people, I talk about, eminence and putting yourself out there and writing blog posts and stuff like that. Because when you grow, you get a lot of
Mm.
your next roles because you put yourself out there and you start to see yourself as a thought leader in the industry. And even if somebody wrote 100 posts, like there's already 100 posts on white space, you can still write about it and bring your perspective to it because you can have a different opinion and it's okay.
Yeah, I when I was in school, we had to write. It was in like a senior level class. We had to write about these different topics, and they were like supposed to be about blog length. And the professor was trying to get us to put our stuff out so that people would see it, like exactly what you're saying, to like refine our own thoughts, but also like potentially generate interest. And I ended up putting mine on Medium. I've
Mm.
taken those posts down now because like they're super cringy to me now. But one of them was like, "Hey, just write a list, like an article, like a blog about the companies you would want to work for." And at the time, and it's partially why I ended up at JP Morgan Chase, I thought that I was interested in large scale companies. So I wrote about like Facebook, Google. Uh,
Mm.
what else did I write about? I might have written about Twitter. Um, but I like literally I called out the CEOs by name. I was like, "Hey, Mark, I want to work for your company. Here's why." Or like, "Hey, Sundar, I want to work for your company. Here's why." And a designer from Mixpanel saw it and reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, I'm in Denver. Let's meet up and have coffee." So I ended up having coffee with someone and talking about design because of that post. And like, obviously, I didn't end up going to those companies that I wrote this post about. I ended up at JP Morgan Chase. And then I also learned that I didn't like large scale. What I liked was getting to scale. But like all of that was just because I wrote and tried something, right?
Mm. That's awesome.
Yeah,
No, that's cool. I want to ask you more of your differing opinions on certain topics.
let's
Okay.
go.
And some of them were the more recent ones. So uh we're just talking about this before we got on the pod.
Mm.
Why don't you like wireframing? What did wireframing do to you and what hurts? Tell me. Tell Dr.
Yeah,
Bernstein.
I love it. So yeah, I mean, like everyone, I was taught how to. I mean, I don't know, like everyone, like everyone that's coming up in school now or going through programs now. I started out learning how to do wireframes. I used balsamic to make my stupid medium fidelity wireframes. Um, I've user tested wireframes, which is stupid. Don't do that, in my opinion. Um,
Wait,
yeah.
why?
Okay. So there's so many reasons why. I'll get there.
Okay,
Wait, I will get there.
okay,
Uh,
okay.
so when I was at Chase, I had the person who found me on Twitter and got me the job at Chase. His name is Craig. There was a Craig, a Greg, and a Tregg all in one team, by the way.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah, it was hard on Zoom calls. Um, but he said it one time. He was like, "I saw wireframes die a horrible death like 5 years ago in this career. The fact that like these people are delivering wireframes to their engineers is silly." And it kind of like wireframe pilled me, or whatever the phrase might be.
Mm.
Right, I saw the light. And I was like, he's right. And then if you have a design system at all, there's this middle step where you're making these medium fidelity wireframes, often in Figma, that doesn't need to happen. Just drop in the components. You have a library. What are you doing? So a lot of people, I had a fairly design Twitter viral tweet about wireframes. Um, so a lot of people read very uncharitable things in that.
Mm.
Literally, I think that the middle step of medium fidelity wireframes is a massive waste of time 99% of the time. Sketching, super useful. I do sketches, and sometimes people's definition of a wireframe looks a little bit more like a sketch. But I think if you are doing whole flows in black and white, drawing like vector boxes, you're wasting time. The faster you can get something to look real, the better, because it's easier to talk to clients, to stakeholders, to your developers, to your teammates about something that looks real than something that looks like a gray box. So when you're user testing a wireframe, first of all, let's assume that you're making a consumer product for someone who's not a designer. You have to have them abstract away why this app is gray boxes. They have to understand what these squiggly lines of filler text mean. Um, it's a mess. It's not useful. Get them something that looks real. And if you're not to the point of having anything that looks real, then you shouldn't be user testing. You should be doing discovery research. If you're doing discovery research, there is room to bring in like an example app, or like a printed out piece of paper that you can cut up and move around, that has stuff that looks real. And it's like, hey, build your perfect app that does XYZ, or, map out your, at Chase, we'd like map out your finances on this piece of paper. Like, where does your bank account sit versus your savings versus your your student loan debt? Like that sort of stuff is super valuable. But a gray wireframe click test, silly. It's super silly in my opinion.
Okay, I'm going to respond, but I want Pascal to jump in before I do, because he knows I'm going to leap for your throat in a minute.
Go
for it. Pascal, why don't you respond before I go on my next rant?
No, it's okay, and I know what you're gonna know, because we've had this conversation before. But I agree with you on wireframing. I'm not gonna lie. I'm where I am in my. I've never wireframed, and I still don't wireframe. I don't even sketch the majority of the time. I just like process everything in my head. I don't know, maybe the way my brain is wired, but that's how I go about it. I think that I've researched a lot of studies, and I'm more happy to share some on that counter argue the wireframe argument, because I know everybody tells us you got to wireframe, you got to remove all expectations for your customers. They're going to create expectations by them, and they're just focusing on that thing. They're not focusing on that blue button that you've created. Sure. But at the same time, I think I've read the counter arguments and studies that prove the total opposite numerous times over. So I think, would I agree? Like, I'm in the zone that if you want to wireframe, you wireframe. I don't care. Don't force me to wireframe. I've never wireframed. I'm not going to start tomorrow. And to me, I'm not. When people force me to wireframe, it irritates me, because I don't know how to wireframe. I just I think in my head and I design, and I've always done it this way. I think, to your point, especially in Figma now, people actually break components, turn them gray to make it look like a wireframe. Like, what's the point of it? You already have the frigging component in Figma. Drop it in, design it, move on with your day. I understand you don't want to get tied into color. Okay, cool. But I don't know. And people are going to have different opinions on it. That's okay. I think you can have the same different opinions as you like blue. I don't like blue. I don't care. Move on with your day. Let's go. Let's just get to the results at the end of the day. It's the same as naming layers. I don't name my layers, and I don't care. Like, I'm not going to lie and say I name all my layers and group everything perfectly. I don't. I'm still where I am, and I would still be able to be a successful designer. I think it's not about, everybody has their own path. Everybody has their own way. Everybody has their reasons for doing things. But I still get outcomes done. My outputs are still outstanding. And I think that's what you got to focus on. Don't get tied down to these silly arguments that everybody has. And yeah, I can keep going on this, but I know Mitch likes to wireframe. I know he likes to sketch, and I respect him for that. And that's okay. But we still get along, even if I don't name my layers.
See, I don't know about the naming layers thing. I might have a problem with that. There's a certain point where you should name your layers, and that's if it's being looked at by a developer, in my opinion. But that's a whole other
I don't
topic.
know.
So I'm on so it's funny because Tregg, you took the stance, the argument that people should not be wireframing. It's a waste of time.
Generally,
Pascal, you took the argument that you don't give a fuck because it doesn't matter. It's always about up to the person, but you personally are wired not to do it, and you've been successful not doing it. And so I'm going to take the other stance, which is yes, you should wireframe, but with asterisk, a big asterisk there, right? So it depends. And in my experience, whenever I show somebody a hi-fi design, and I'm not trying to actually talk about the UI, they get so embedded into talking about the pixels that they forget the whole point of the study. And I can never get them back on the study the way that I need them to get the results that I want. Maybe I'm a bad researcher, probably, and that probably plays into it. But what I've noticed, no matter how much I ask them and prompt them beforehand, they get distracted. So when I dumb down the UI, so it's just wireframes, I can get them to understand the user experience flow and then worry about the other details later. Because number one, I don't know all the details until after. Like, I don't know if I need to design that feature at all, right? Why would I spend so much time designing something, making it look good, and then showing it to them? And they go, oh, wait, that's not for me. I'm not that type of user. I'm a different persona, basically, right? And that's happened before. And so we scaled back, and I don't agree with the mid-fi. I don't think we should be doing mid-fi design anymore. I think that I agree with, where
mm-hmm.
we should be getting rid of that, because you're just adding an extra additional step when you can jump and just do everything in the hi-fi at that point, instead of having to scale back, make it grayscale, whatever. But I would say maybe my wireframe is more close to a sketch. That way it's not super nice and neat. Like, I'm not like, oh my God, I got to get the pixels correct in the wireframe. It's just, I got to have a left side panel, which is just a regular rectangle. It's very long, and I stretch it past the artboard, right? I don't really care. But it's a wireframe that's black and white because I'm not testing the visuals. I'm testing the experience going through it, like going through the whole like wizard flow, for example, creating an object. Am I getting the right content in there? Am I getting the right, like, that's what I test when I do a wireframe content, more so than the actual usability of, is this button big enough? Do you notice it? Whatever.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I agree that there is always an asterisk. Like, even in my original tweet that started this whole thing, I said, like, wireframes are really good at solving layout problems, where you're like, I know I need something here. Maybe I'll put a box that represents it for now. Like, that's fine. And I also think that a lot of people's understanding of wireframes are conflated with sketching. For me, I spend a lot of time in, like, people were saying, like, do you skip low fidelity? Do you just start design? Like, no, like, I spend a lot of time writing. I actually type out a lot of things about the experiences I'm going to design. And I spend a lot of time in user flows or task flows, whatever you want to call them, and then user journeys. Like, that's the area where a lot of my time is spent. I've also started championing these the concept of user roles and user role maps uh, to replace personas, because I also hate personas. So that's a whole other
Wait,
thing.
what? Wait. So you're replacing them with from going from personas to user roles. What's the
Yes.
difference?
Yeah. So user roles are based in role theory and activity theory. It's actually like almost like a pre-internet HCI thing, human computer interaction. But the concept is that you have a system and actors inside the system. So the users using your thing are actors, and actors can pass through different roles as they use a system. So, like, an example is, at a pizza restaurant, you might have all the people who are employed that are your actors, and they pass through different roles as they're going about their day working. Maybe the person who is, the bus person, they're picking up pizza trays and cleaning up tables. At the end of the day, they change from busboy to sweeper or whatever the case may be. And more like a hands-on and digital world. When I was working on Stark, we mapped out designers, product managers, engineers, like stakeholders, those different actors, and how they pass through the Stark ecosystem and how they become, like, an accessibility expert is one of the roles, an engineering expert, and, like, at different stages along the journey, you have those different contexts. And that's way more useful to me than here's a picture of so and so in a persona that like they drive a car, like it's a Toyota. I don't care what their annual household income is. I don't care what car they drive. I don't care if they're on a scale of 1 to 10 how much they like Adobe. Like it's a waste of mental energy and time as a designer to design those things out. I would rather, if we know we're starting with assumptions, put those assumptions out, mark down that they are assumptions, and then get to a place where we have something that looks real and test it with people fast. So I spend a lot of time in this upfront user flow, user journey, user role land, and then get to high fidelity as fast as possible and validate that these ideas actually map to people's experiences.
User rules sounds like user tasks almost. Is that
That's similar.
Okay, so why would somebody use user roles as opposed to personas if you can just say, okay, these are just tasks that this type of persona does?
It's far more actionable, and you also
Hmm.
cut out all the useless demographic information that
Okay.
you add to a persona. Personas look different everywhere, obviously. Like the ones I have the biggest bone to pick with are like the proto personas that are made by like marketing or made based on marketing personas. Like those, like oftentimes they're based on assumptions about people. They're almost always stereotypes, and if you're operationalizing a stereotype, that's a problem. And then people like a common use case for a persona is you ask it an imaginary question. You're like, would Susie do XYZ? I don't know. Susie's not real. Let's actually talk to Susie. Uh, yeah, it's a mess. So I advocate for cutting that out of the equation entirely, and starting from a task and role perspective is much more useful to me. And then like when you take a user journey, like for Stark, it was the product development pipeline. So from early discovery and research to actually like delivering on a thing and thinking about accessibility along each step. What does a different actor assuming a different role have to think about in those moments, and what are the opportunities that come out of that? So like where could we meaningfully inject our products into those people's lives to make that step of the journey better for them? And that's like way more fruitful than like, would Susie use XYZ? And it's like, yeah, because we want her to use it. It's like none of it's real. Same problem with wireframes. It's like this middle step that like doesn't actually mean anything. It's just like it made sense when it was harder to draw things on the internet or on your computer. Like it made sense when Photoshop was the design tool. But now it's like we got Figma. You just hit R and draw a rectangle. Like it's so easy. So
That's cool. I want to dive into a little bit more of your Stark experience. And what are the biggest misconceptions people have about designing for accessibility? Also, like designing software, because Stark is not only designing for accessibility, you're designing for accessibility for others.
yeah, it's kind of it's tricky too because you're designing for designers at Stark.
Which are the worst users ever. Designers are just unbearable, knowing that I'm a designer, a very needy person.
Yeah, they're like they get super focused on things that are the wrong thing.
Yeah, their user role is to be an ass. That's really what we are.
Yeah, like you'll get like a screenshot from a user, and it's like, why is this 1 pixel off? And it's like, I don't know. Have you looked at your own app lately?
The icons aren't aligned. We
But
talked
also-
about that in the pod, I think, actually once. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no. Also, there is validity to it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
There's another hot take that you've probably seen of mine, where it's like, oftentimes the design nuance, like we talk about, like icons and like should it be a 1.5 pixel? But then if I like do like actual pixel render mode, then I see all the like grains and the pixels. Like that stuff doesn't matter, but it does. It's like the death of a thousand cuts. Like if you ignore every single time the important design thing, then eventually you're just an awful product, and it's just why not use Craigslist or whatever. But yeah, anyway, so at Stark, designing for designers is a problem, but also it's like a fun challenge because that's like a group of people that I love and I love design. A misconception that people have about accessibility as a whole is that it's hard, and my hot take is that the accessibility consultants and companies of the world, not including Stark, want to make it seem hard because they have a vested interest in it because they make money acting like it's hard so they can consult. It's really not that hard if you start from the beginning with accessibility. It can be a daunting task, and it is expensive, and it can take a long time, but it doesn't mean that it's not simple.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I mean, it literally comes down to, if you're following the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust, poor. That's their like ethos, their like principles. If you follow that, most questions you have about accessibility become pretty obvious. It's like, should I do XYZ? Like, will that make it perceivable? Probably not, because I can't see the contrast. Fix it. Is it operable? Can people use it if they are using a screen reader or assistive technology like switches and different ways of navigating the web? If they can't use it using those methodologies, then no. Like, if they can't navigate your site with a keyboard, then it's not operable. So you failed. It's just like literally going down the list. It's very logical. Another thing working against accessibility and making it seem really hard is the way the WCAG is written. It is written like it's for robots. It's very hard to understand. It's a monolithic effort that like 6 people take on. By the way, it's not written by very many people, and people don't understand that it's a very small group of volunteers that write the WCAG. So there's a lot of you're coming from a down position. You're trying to get people interested in accessibility, make it seem easy. But when you really get in there, it's not that hard. There's not that much to consider.
So, I guess why wouldn't somebody just make like a Chat GPT chatbot that lets you, uh, I guess, port over all the, what do you call it, the WCAD?
WCAG, or WCAG, some people say, the WCAG, depending on who you are.
Whatever that phrase is, I know it stands for the thing.
Yeah.
But what if they just ported that all into I don't know why I'm using the word port, but like you're importing it into a model, and then you export, the chatbot, and then that is like kind of like you can interface with it in a more simple human way. Is that something that's like possible?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, ask it right now, and it answers
No, probably
fairly
does.
well.
True. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
we'll have to build that.
Literally using ChatGPT, you just be like, hey, I have a floating action button. What's the best way to make that accessible? And it can say it can give you literally code snippets on how to make it accessible, if it's iOS or whatever the case may be. It's actually fairly good at that. And I asked it some pretty tricky questions, like when it first dropped back in November or whenever that was first blowing up. We asked it some pretty tricky questions, and it answers fairly well, similar to the way that like a Stark employee would answer the questions.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. Pascal, do you have any questions on that?
Not on that, but I wanted to go back to we talk a lot about controversial and topics and design. There's a lot of controversy on, like, it's easy to pick a fight on design because like a lot of it, obviously there's some facts and laws that you mentioned at the beginning, like the UX laws. Those are like basic foundational laws. Like, a lot of people can recite them by heart, but when you look at their design, they obviously don't know, and that's another conversation. But like, what is, in your opinion, right now, the most controversial topic in design? And I mean, there's an array of them, but where I'm trying to get to this is, people are trying to figure out how to navigate design, how to grow in their career, and how to move forward. They're following a lot of people, etc. What's the controversial topic from your point of view that could help them move forward, take the noise out, etc.? Tough question, I know, but
yeah. A lot of what makes people mad in controversy is often really simple things, and I think part of the reason for that is like to get past the simple layer. It requires a certain level of experience, and there's just less people that are past that layer that can talk about something. So talking about naming layers is something that makes a lot of people mad, because almost everyone can relate to it in one way or the other. The same is true of like I have a friend who, you maybe saw his tweet kind of go viral, where he was talking about same sort of thing I was saying, where like there's a lot of stuff that designers worry about isn't worth worrying about. And like, if you have a small, he's bootstrapping a business, so he feels this himself. Like, I could spend all day fixing the little design bugs on my landing page, but I don't have enough monthly run rate to worry about that right now. Like, I have all these other problems, and that makes
Mm.
people mad too, because then that makes them feel invalidated as a designer, that like the things we worry about aren't important. And
Hmm.
like, it's kind of true, but it's also not true at the same time. Like I said, earlier, um, there's validity that you need to have. Um, like, design needs to be considered. It needs to be, things should be as clean as they can be given the state of things. But also, at some point, you need to ship your products. So I think that's one thing. A controversial thing that I think would help a lot of people is understanding that design is a business career, um,
Mm.
and that businesses want to be profitable, and if that your salary costs more than the profit or revenue that you bring in for your company, then you get laid off. That's just like how it works. And it's not fun to get laid off. I've been there. I've had my salary cut by 50%. Like, it's not fun. But like, if you understand that, first of all, you feel it. You can feel it breathing down your neck.
Mm.
I've been on a team where I was like, let me do the math. We're some of the highest paid people in the company, and they frozen hiring, and we don't make anything that could make
Mhm.
them money. Who would I cut first? But if you can think
So
about
is
your
that
career with it.
sorry, I was gonna say, is that why you think designers usually get fired first from like layoffs in terms of like who do we cut?
I
Well, who
think
gets
so.
cut first is,
I think so
yeah,
because like
think so.
developers and like developers are gonna think we don't need designers. I can go and do it myself. We got tools. I'm just gonna design. True.
I
To
mean,
some degree, I mean they're not wrong. They can build stuff. But at the end of the day,
yeah.
it's like the tweet I said I posted earlier this week. It's like you can build a cardboard chair. It's a chair. It works fantastic. But you could also build an Eames chair that's been around for 70 years and it's still going to be around for another 70 years because it's a
Yeah.
timeless piece of, and it's well crafted. I mean, you can tell like the products that launch without design and the ones that do, that put the user at the center and then they're really well crafted. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're all replaceable. It doesn't matter who you are. Now it's like even developers
Mhm.
may end up being replaceable with ChatGPT and like all the code space. I mean, we're all going to end up at one point. But I think unfortunately, a lot of companies, not everybody, because we now have a seat at the table, like the CEO of Ford is like an ex-designer, et cetera. We do have, like, we're growing in the craft, but
Mhm.
many companies still do see design as quick exit. We don't need them. We're going to figure it out. And they're not half wrong.
Yeah, I think if you're in brand design, you're much more susceptible to that way of thinking. Like, marketing, research, and brand are the first branches to get cut, in my experience, and then potentially product design. Obviously, it depends on your company and how they value design. Some companies value design a lot more than others. But if you think in terms of profit centers versus cost centers, it starts to make sense why marketing is a cost center. And it's kind of silly in one way that, like, we think of it that way, because also you need the cost centers to bring in business. And like, like, to me, laying off researchers first is kind of like, oh, we don't need eyes, we'll just go, we'll just go in the dark. It's like, you gouged out your eyes first. That was silly. uh, it's, yeah, it's one of the first things to get cut, and I think it's a mistake. But also, um, if you structure your career in the way that you work in a way that your value so vastly outpaces the cost of hiring you, and not that you should take less money necessarily, but also, like, just do such good work that, like, laying you off would be detrimental to the culture of a company. Like, I think that there's a lot to be said about that. Like, being the term a culture carrier. I think there's something there about, like, being the person who, like, people go to for something. When I was in school, I read this book, Burn Your Portfolio, and I don't remember who the author is, but he runs an agency, or at least at the time ran an agency, and he talks about the story about how every time they hire a new person, they have these like big lunches for all the team members, and they go around the table and they all tell their worst first job story or like their worst job story. And there's one guy who, to the day of him writing the book, had the worst job story, and it was he worked at a dog food factory. And when they make dog food, they use old rancid meat and they pour it in this vat and they grind it up and turn it into dog food. And it would splash back on him, and it would get onto his, like, he's wearing a suit to like protect him, but it would seep through the suit and it would get into his pores, and then he would sweat and smell like dog food. And what's funny about that disgusting story is like that guy, I think he was a developer. That guy, if their studio toilet plugged, he was the person to go fix it. And if a light bulb was out, he'd be the person to go fix it. And I'm not saying you have to be the janitor of your design office, but also like to be the person that is willing to get your hands dirty and fix a problem first, to be have the bias towards action, immediately made it so that every time the author of this book had to look at layoffs, that person was never considered, because it was like he'll unplug our toilet, like he's the guy that will help us. There's something to be said about that, and treating your career that way.
So
I don't know how controversial
code?
that is or not, but
So should designers code?
yes, but no. I think designers need to understand code. The more you understand it, the better. It never hurts to understand how back end code works. Especially, a lot of designers have a big blind spot there. They ignore back end. And I worked on a team at Candid with only back end engineers, and that was a trip. There was like one full stack dude who would come up every once in a while to help build the things I was designing for him. But that was awesome to be in like these stand-ups with engineers talking about migrations and backfills, and I'm like, I don't know what any of that means. I do now. But yeah, I think designers should at the very least understand code. That'd be like an architect being like, I don't know how gravity works. It's like, well, that's a mistake, because now all your structural engineers are going to hate you because you're designing things that defy gravity, and they have to figure out where to put their load-bearing walls in your floating, marble building. It's a mess. Yeah, so yeah, 100% designers should understand code. I don't think that for the majority of designers that coding in your 9 to 5 is a good use of time, because you're probably slower than your engineers. It depends. Obviously, that's not a black and white statement. Like, I've worked with engineers who used to be designers and are awesome, and can like do most of it on their own. And I've worked with people that are the opposite as well. Engineers who became designers. Did I say that? Strike and reverse it either way. I've worked with both types. So I think that sometimes designers should code on your own projects. Code all the time.
I think
Awesome.
I think building empathy for developers is extremely important, because people like designers, like if you code or not, like designers who don't understand, they have defects to fix. They're bound, and they're obviously evaluated by the amount of defects they closed, etc. So we need to understand that side of the world. It's not just about understanding code. It's and building empathy for them, and understanding how they are evaluated, what their day-to-day looks like compared to you moving pixels and user research, etc. So I think it was just, adding a and to your statement there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and also understanding when like you add something to a UI, that's probably going to be an endpoint that doesn't exist, and is it really worth building this new endpoint that shows like one little piece of data? Like, is it actually worth it for the engineer, or would you rather spend the time building the thing that actually moves the needle for your business, for your product, for your users?
Great. So we covered accessibility as being important, wireframing, who fucking cares? Don't do it. And designers should understand code and have empathy for the developers. Thank you so much, Tregg. This was an awesome episode. Really, truly.
Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Is there anything you want to plug? Anything you want to share?
Yeah.
Socials?
Yeah, so I'm at Treggify on Twitter. I'm at tre.gg on Blue Sky. I'm one of the cool kids that got invited 2 days ago. That's also my website, tre.gg. That's my portfolio. I have a list of resources called degreeless. So that's like having a degree less .design. That is a list of resources for designers who want to learn. It is very opinionated and structured. I think you should understand the basics from the beginning. I'm in the process of reworking that and doing a bunch of cool stuff with it. Making a course, actually. I'm shilling a course.
Do it.
So I'm in the early stages of that. That should be coming soon.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Thank you so much.